The story of how medieval builders protected their timber from mold and decay is more fascinating than most people realize. There is a persistent assumption about the medieval world that it was resigned to decay. Timber rotted, ships leaked, houses sagged, mold crept into beams and boards because people lacked the chemistry to prevent it. But the reality is less convenient and far more instructive. Across Europe and parts of the Islamic world, craftsmen developed deliberate methods to harden and preserve wood against moisture, fungi, and insects. They did not speak in the language of polymers or biocides, but they understood cause and effect. They knew that untreated timber invited failure, and failure invited collapse of buildings, of ships, sometimes of entire campaigns. One of the least discussed of these methods was the practice of dipping or soaking timber in protective solutions before construction. This was not an occasional experiment. In shipyards, in monastic estates, and in frontier fortifications, immersion treatments were part of a broader survival strategy. Timber was the skeleton of medieval life. Preserving it was not optional. What follows is not a romantic tale of lost secrets, but a closer look at how medieval societies confronted mold and decay with practical chemistry, and how those decisions shaped military endurance, maritime expansion, and even long-term settlement patterns. The medieval world depended on wood more than we tend to remember. Stone survives in the archaeological record, but wood does not. That imbalance really distorts our perception. Medieval towns were overwhelmingly timber-framed. Defensive palisades, watchtowers, bridges, siege engines, carts, tools, roofing shingles, and naval fleets were all built from wood. In Northern Europe especially, oak forests were considered strategic resources. In places like the Baltic and along the North Sea coast, moisture was constant. Timber structures faced rain, ground damp, and salt-laden air. Mold and fungal rot were not just cosmetic issues. Fungal decay weakens cellulose and lignin, reducing structural integrity long before any visible collapse. A beam might appear solid while actually losing its load-bearing capacity internally. For military architecture, that meant risk. A wooden hoarding mounted atop a stone wall could fail during a siege. A siege tower weakened by rot could collapse under its own weight. A ship hull compromised by fungi could open seams in heavy seas. Preserving timber was therefore not merely about longevity, it was really about operational reliability. They understood that moisture was the enemy long before they knew why. Medieval craftsmen lacked germ theory, but they observed patterns. Wood that remained wet rotted faster. Timber cut in certain seasons lasted longer. Oak submerged in water for extended periods behaved differently from wood left exposed. Foresters and builders often preferred winter-felled timber. Trees cut during dormant months contained less sap, reducing the nutrients available for fungi. This was empirical knowledge accumulated across generations. In some regions, timber was intentionally soaked in running water for weeks or months. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive, water promoting preservation. But immersion in cold, oxygen-poor environments leaches sugars and starches that fungi feed on. This was one form of timber dipping, submersion in streams, ponds, or tidal zones to condition the wood before use. It did not sterilize the material, but it made it less hospitable to decay. Pitch, tar, and resin were not crude coatings but deliberate antifungal barriers. The most documented immersion treatments involved heated pitch or tar, derived from pine resins or through the slow pyrolysis of wood in tar kilns. These substances created hydrophobic barriers. Scandinavian shipbuilders were especially known for tar production, and Baltic tar became a major trade commodity in the late medieval and early modern periods. Timber components, particularly those destined for ships, were sometimes dipped or heavily brushed with heated tar mixtures. The process penetrated surface fibers and sealed pores. By limiting moisture absorption and oxygen exchange, tar treatments slowed fungal colonization. This was not aesthetic blackening. It was preservation chemistry. Tarred hulls resisted rot longer, and in northern climates, that difference could determine whether a vessel lasted 5 seasons or 15. For polities dependent on naval mobility, such as the Hanseatic cities or later Scandinavian kingdoms, preservation practices influenced economic and military durability. Lime washing and alkaline baths created hostile environments for mold. Another overlooked method involved lime. Quicklime, when slaked with water, forms calcium hydroxide, a strongly alkaline substance. Medieval builders used lime extensively in mortar and plaster, but it also had preservative applications. Timber surfaces in barns, cellars, and certain fortifications were sometimes coated with lime wash. High alkalinity inhibits fungal growth. While lime wash is more commonly associated with masonry, timber in contact with damp ground or enclosed in humid environments benefited from alkaline treatment. In some cases, wooden elements were dipped in lime-rich solutions prior to installation. The practice was especially useful in agricultural settings where mold threatened stored grain and hay. Preservation here had economic implications. Spoiled grain meant famine risk. Maintaining dry, mold-resistant structures was part of broader food security. Saltwater immersion served both maritime and defensive needs. Coastal societies observed that timber submerged in salt water for extended periods resisted certain types of biological decay. Salt inhibits many fungal species and deters insects such as wood-boring beetles. Ship timbers, pilings, and defensive stakes were sometimes seasoned in tidal zones before use. While marine borers like shipworms posed their own dangers, in colder northern waters their activity was limited. The net effect in some regions favored salt conditioning as a preservative step. Smoke curing functioned as a chemical treatment, not just a byproduct of heating. Smokehouses preserved meat through antimicrobial compounds in smoke. The same principle applied, intentionally or not, to wood. Timber stored in smoky environments, such as above hearths or in dedicated curing sheds, absorbed phenolic compounds and other chemicals that resist fungal growth. Some medieval builders deliberately smoke-cured beams destined for humid interiors. Roof timbers in great halls often darkened not merely from use, but from prolonged smoke exposure before installation. The process reduced moisture content and deposited preservative compounds. This method required time and fuel. Its use indicates foresight. Builders investing in smoke curing expected long-term returns in durability. Preservation practices shaped the success of medieval fleets. Naval warfare and trade depended on hull integrity. Northern European cogs, Mediterranean galleys, and riverine transports all relied on timber that endured prolonged exposure to water. If you value this kind of close examination, where overlooked technical decisions illuminate broader historical realities, subscribe to Hidden in History. Share this video with others who appreciate serious, in-depth analysis. The past still has lessons to offer, provided we are willing to look beneath the surface.